So yeah. Actually, I have a question. Are you a fan of science fiction?
I am.
Okay, yeah. Are you familiar with the book "A Moon Is a Harsh Mistress"?
Robert Heinlein.
Yeah.
I think I've made it through half a Heinlein book. I
Yeah,
read
okay.
the moon. I read about half of the moon is a harsh mistress and Stranger in a Strange Land. I could never quite get into his style, although I do hear that he's ANCAP and freedom oriented and so on. It just seemed too self-consciously cool. There were no actual people in his books for me. I like some crossed wires, some vulnerabilities, some challenges, and everybody just seemed very self-consciously cool and able. And it just seemed like a bit more of an advertisement for his own cool self rather than exploratory literature. And so I could never quite get into him, but I'm certainly happy to hear contrary arguments or experiences.
Yeah, it's a very subjective thing, right? So yeah, I did enjoy the Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I wasn't quite so happy with Stranger in a Strange Land. Those are the only two books I've read of his. Um, the other book I'm kind of interested to hear what your opinion is on is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah. Was it Robert Persoff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I read that, maybe when I was about 17 or so. And yeah, tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoyed it. It was a number of years ago where I first read it. I quite enjoyed it. It was quite different, a kind of an interesting, more it's quite autobiographical, I think. And then the follow up book, Layla, I think it's called, was quite interesting as well. Um, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. The mix of the motorcycle kind of journey and then his own kind of viewpoint on reality, I guess, in some sense. Yeah, I quite enjoyed that. I'm kind of interested into what would your favorite book be apart from the books you've written yourself? Would you have any recommendations for any particular book?
Sorry, it's just a bit of a general question.
Yeah.
So you read a little bit of Heinlein and you read a little bit of Robert Pirsig, but you're not really sharing any particular thoughts about them or stuff that other people might be interested in, right? Because it's like, I read this book, I thought it was interesting. That's not much of a conversation topic. And sorry to be a nag again, but
Okay.
what is it that you got out of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
I liked it because he was exploring the concept of quality, which is never really fully defined, but I found that quite interesting as a concept. And yeah, I did get something out of it in that respect, and I felt I felt it was a worthwhile read. I do have a book I'd like to recommend for anybody who's interested. It's not a fictional book, but it's quite a startling and amazingly well written story. It's called The Tiger. I think it's written by a Canadian guy, John Valiant, and it's about a Siberian tiger in the eastern part of Russia that was hunted down and killed as a result of it becoming a manhunter. But it's a great book in sense of the history of the region and the creature itself, and the whole story is it's a beautifully written book, and the fact that it's a true story is interesting as well. Yeah.
Okay. And what is it that you got out of the book that you consider important? Was there a life message or a moral or an insight or something else?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. The whole story is about this tiger that hunted down and killed a man. And what I took away from the book was this apex. It's an apex predator. That it's the largest wild cat in nature, and there's only a few of them remaining at this point. And I think the theory of mind that kind of came out of the book about the tiger itself was quite interesting. And he brings up these aspects of revenge from the tiger's point of view, and then all the forensic evidence sort of pointing towards that conclusion that the tiger did seek revenge on a particular person. Wasn't a random attack. It was a purposeful act of revenge that the tiger inflicted upon this man. And then, so I thought that was quite interesting. The other thing I kind of thought it was.
I'm sorry, hang on. So revenge is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you? I'm not sure.
Well,
are you used to engaging people in terms of content, or do you just say stuff?
No,
this book was
like,
interesting. I like this. Revenge is interesting. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what to contribute to the conversation. Okay, let me ask you this. Have you ever had revenge on someone who's done you wrong? Had vengeance?
Not in a violent way. No.
Okay. What is the non-violent vengeance that you've taken on someone who's done you wrong?
Yes, it's a tricky question for me, at least. I guess I suppose I kind of draw a bit of a line between revenge and vengeance. Maybe you can define the difference between those if I'm misreading that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of we can sort of exact revenge on another person, right?
I really want to have a conversation with you. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. How clear do you think you're being, and how concise are your answers?
Yeah, they're not very concise.
Okay, so if you don't want to have a conversation with me, that's totally fine. I've got other callers and all of that. I just find it kind of odd. And I'm sorry to be a nag, right? I really am, because I don't know if people have just lost the art of conversation. This is, I think, part of why people just, and you're not doing it now, but why maybe on Wednesday you and other people just kind of talk over me. I don't know if people are used to being back and forth in the conversation, but if I say, you say, I find vengeance or revenge. You say, I find revenge very interesting. I'm like, okay, well, what's your experience been with revenge? Let's talk about something that is practical in the world rather than you find a theory of mind in a book interesting, which doesn't communicate anything. No, let's not do that. Well, you start talking when I'm talking. You just did this on Wednesday, if you remember, right?
Sorry.
So
that wasn't, sorry, Stefan, that wasn't me speaking then.
Oh, my apologies. Okay. Thank you for the clarity.
Okay. It was me. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. Thank you for the clarification. All right. So in life, this is a good philosophical point as a whole. So in life, we want people to enjoy talking with us. And how do we get people to enjoy talking with us? We try to be clear and concise, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so if you say, I find vengeance very interesting, and then move on to another topic, I don't know what you find interesting about revenge. You're just making a statement. It would be like me trying to have a conversation with saying, I like cheesecake. It's like, what can the other person add? I do or don't like cheesecake. And a cheesecake is a lot more defined in a sense than vengeance. At least it's a physical thing. So you say, I find the concept of the tiger took revenge, and I find the concept of vengeance or revenge very interesting. And I say, oh, what has your experience of vengeance been? And you say, well, I haven't been violent in terms of my vengeance. And it's like, okay, so but just tell me about non-violent vengeance. So I say, okay, tell me about non-violent vengeance. And you say, well, it's complicated because the difference between revenge and vengeance is very complicated, and how to define it is really challenging. And it's just like, you understand, it's kind of exhausting. We're not actually having a conversation because you need to, and even if you and I were just talking, I mean, we're talking to an audience here as well, right? So if you say that you find the idea of vengeance interesting, then you have to have ideas, I assume, about vengeance. And maybe you've never had any vengeance in your life. And maybe you don't want to say that. Maybe that makes you sound weak or something like that. But if you bring up the topic of vengeance and I say, tell me about your experience with vengeance. And you say, well, vengeance is very hard to define, and there's revenge and there's vengeance. And it's just like, oh my God, we've been talking for 10 minutes and I still haven't got any content from you. And so again, I'm not trying to be a nag. I'm really trying to help you in terms of conversation. And we owe it. It's a form of empathy to be clear and concise in our communication with others. Now, of course, there's things when you need to define your terms and all of that. You know, if you have already talked about revenge and we're in that topic because of the Tiger book, I don't know that you really, I think we kind of all understand what revenge is. You know, it's fighting back in a harsh manner against a historical wrong. Revenge is, in the moment, it's almost like self-defense. Someone punches you, you punch them back, right? And so that's in the moment. Revenge tends to be, what's the old saying? Revenge is a dish best served cold. So revenge tends to be down the road. You then do something to punch back against someone or harm someone who has harmed you in the past. And it tends not to be violent, at least in the West, but there's other ways of doing it. So if you say, I haven't had violent vengeance on someone, okay, well, of course, I wouldn't expect you to admit that on a public conversation because it might be illegal, right? Like I loosened the brakes on someone's car, you know, like I wouldn't expect. So that's kind of understood that you're not going to be confessing to some horrible crime because vengeance is later on when you're not in an immediate situation of danger. And therefore it is probably illegal to have violent vengeance. You know, like, this guy cut me off in the car. So later I set fire to his house. His vengeance, like that would be confessing something. So of course we're not going to be talking about something violent. And if it's too much work to have a conversation, people tend not to have conversations as a whole. And if you want to be in demand as a conversationalist, you need to find ways. And I say this to myself, like, please understand, I'm not trying to nag on you from some place of perfection or anything, but I'm like, okay, how can I add value to this conversation so that people walk away with something that they can use, something that is productive? So the way that I view conversations, and maybe this is helpful to you and I'll shut up soon, but the way that I view conversations is I'm trying to add value. If I want someone to listen to me, I need to be adding value in some way to something they can do. So in this particular instance, conversation is kind of a lost art form because people do everything online and people have structured interactions like they're yelling at strategy on some gaming server or something like that, or they're sharing memes or reels or something. So this sort of art of back and forth conversation I think is really, really important. And that's why I do these call-in shows. And it's why it's very nice to have this good platform for that. And so when you're in conversation, and we have conversations all day long, for the most part, this is my 7th hour of conversations today, not even including my family. So we have conversations all day long. And I think what we want to do is say, what is the most value I can add in the shortest amount of time in a conversation? And if it is the case that, somebody's been talking with you for 10 minutes and they're not really gaining any particular information or insights or nothing that's of particular value. I like Robert Heinlein. I like Robert Pirsig. The theory of mind in this book is interesting and vengeance is interesting. Like there's no actual content there that we can interact on. You're just telling me things that you like without defining them. And so we get to vengeance and I say, okay, well, tell me a little bit about your experience with vengeance. And you say, well, it's tough to define and this and that and the other. And at some point, it's just like, this is too much work. It is too much work to try and get value out of the conversation. And so it's kind of interesting because it's a middle of the road thing. So if you imagine you go see your favorite band, right? And you say, oh, they're going to play 20 of their greatest songs. And you're thrilled about that, right? And then they come out and they play 40 songs. I mean, you'd be happy unless they played each song at twice speed. I mean, I guess Queen used to do We Will Rock You, a fast version. But most times you wouldn't want the band to play the songs at double speed. So you also wouldn't want them to play a quarter speed, right? So you want a good number of songs played at the right speed. And so with conversation, if you don't define anything, when you say, I like the theory of mind that's in this book, I don't know what you mean by theory of mind. I don't know what you like about it. I can't relate. I can't transfer that content into my mind. And so I'm just hearing you say things you like that I don't particularly define. And that's like playing the songs way too fast.
Okay.
It's like doing Bohemian Rhapsody in 35 seconds. It's just kind of a squeal and a bunch of noise. So you do absolutely have to define your terms. And then, of course, people will say, but Steph, he was trying to define his terms by saying there was a difference between vengeance and revenge, and they're complicated to define. And here's the thing, though. If you think that vengeance versus revenge need to be defined, rather than telling me that it's important to define them, you could do what?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I should have a dictionary in front of me, I think, really.
No, I'm not saying dictionary because that's an unrealistic standard. But if you say it's important to distinguish between revenge and vengeance, that's totally fine. But don't tell me that it's important.
Okay.
Right? So if I start introducing the word truth, I might say that which corresponds to reason and evidence. I wouldn't have a speech about how important it is to define the truth. I would just define the truth and move on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, I think from my point of view, like we did have a conversation. I think the first time, it's going back a little ways now, and then you started sort of asking me questions about my family history and different things, and that allowed me to sort of flow a little easier into the conversation. I think perhaps I just sort of lack the same skills that you have, where you can get a conversation going. And I think I was hoping for this to lead into the, usually when we talk about vengeance, we're talking about human beings. And I think that the thing I found interesting was this, the fact that this animal had exerted vengeance on a human being. And I thought, well, okay, that's kind of an interesting topic. And I think I was just hoping, I don't know why, this is obviously a lack on my part, that an assumption on my part, that you would somehow kind of pick up on it or something. I don't know. So again, I apologize.
So and it's very interesting. And I think that the mechanics of the conversation is very interesting to talk about. So you wanted to bring up the topic of vengeance, and you were hoping that I would pick up on it. And what were you hoping that I would do with the topic of vengeance?
Well, I think I was hoping that when I mentioned the fact that this tiger had exerted vengeance, then I guess I was just hoping that, okay, that would be something of interest or an interesting topic to explore. But I didn't really think it out very well, I don't think. It's not even like I had this kind of idea of bringing up this book in the first place. So I guess I'm more like, I'm hoping for just a kind of an easy flow into a conversation, but I'm using up, this is not the correct, place for that, because
it's fine. It's fine, and I appreciate it. But when you hit the I want to talk button, what is it that you wanted to get across or talk about with me and the audience? Because I like this book. I like that book. This book has a theory of mind. This book is about vengeance. Honestly, I'm not trying to put you down or anything, but if you've ever had little kids and they tell you about their dreams, it's just, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And I know you're not that way. So when you said, I want to talk, and you want to, it's fine, monopolize this particular interaction, what value did you want to bring to me and the audience? Because this is important in life. What value are you bringing when you're asking people to interact with you? And this is not particular to this show or this conversation. And again, Richard, I really appreciate that we're having a conversation about this, because it's important. Because in life, you want people to interact with you. How do you get people to interact with you? How do you get them to want to talk with you? I think they have to receive value relatively quickly.
Yeah.
And so, and this is a big challenge in life.
Yeah.
How do you provide value to people when you are first talking with them?
I usually when I think back to all the conversations I've had, I just, generally speaking, I ask the person a question in the hope that I will be opening up something they want to talk about. You know what I mean? So I think I'm out of my comfort zone here because I'm not used to being. I'm not used to being the one who sort of puts the answer out there first. I'm generally speaking the one who's asking the questions, and then the other person then talks about whatever it is they want to talk about, and then it kind of flows from there. So I think I'm probably just out of my comfort zone here, being
Well,
the
hang
one.
on. So, sorry to interrupt. So then it would seem to me that the value that you provide is stimulating other people to talk about what they want to talk about or something like that. Sorry if I'm oversimplifying.
No, that's correct. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So the value that you provide is giving other people the opportunity to speak.
Yes.
Where do you think that comes from?
Wait, that's an interesting question. Man, I don't know. Perhaps by not being listened to as a child, I think perhaps.
Well, let me ask you this. When you were a child, who was fascinated by your thoughts? Who was not you? Obviously, we're all fascinated by our own thoughts. Who was interested in your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't. I can't think of anybody really.
And I'm really sorry for that. I mean, in genuine big hugs across the pixels sympathy, I'm really sorry about that. I mean, I'm a parent myself, and my daughter's mind is like a fascinating place for me to visit, and my wife's mind and my friends' minds and so on.
Yeah.
So what was your experience as a child with your parents' interest?
In their interest with me?
Hmm.
I do remember. I do remember one. I don't know how old I was, 6 or 7 or something like this. It was Christmas morning, and back then, it was back in England. We lived in a tiny house. There's pillowcases, whatever. And I'd already.
I'm sorry,
I was.
pillowcases?
I wanted to be.
How do pillowcases fit into that?
Oh, I don't know if you remember, they put the pillowcases out and fill them up with gifts for the kids, sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Pillowcases are like sacks for. Sorry, that was a little bit of a jump there. Okay, so pillowcases like stockings on the mantelpiece. Got it.
Anyway, so my dad knew that as a little child, I was sort of obsessed with cowboys. Right? So I had this cowboy kind of outfit thing I wanted my dad to get me. And I'd shown it to him at the toy store and everything, and then I was so excited. Christmas morning, he'd get up, and then we'd come in and jump on the bed. That's my brother and I, and then he gave me a soccer ball, and I remember just crying. I mean, that was because that was something he wanted me to have, because he was obsessed with sport, and I really wasn't. And he was always going on about who these different soccer players he knew and how they become professionals, and it really didn't interest me at all as a child. And then when he gave me this soccer ball, I started crying. He got really angry at me because he said, "Oh, you're being ungrateful," and everything. I was just a little child, right? You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's I don't know if that's pertinent to what you asked me, but that's a memory that sort of stays in my brain, right?
Yeah, no, that's a marker. I call them markers. It's just something that you remember because it has very great meaning, and it really does. So do you remember your parents seeking out your thoughts and ideas and conversation? Like, oh, let's go for a walk, let's catch up, and what do you think of this, and what do you think of that? And, trying to pursue and understand what was going on in your head.
No.
That was very quick, and I'm not disagreeing with you. And how old are you now?
67 right now.
Right. Okay. So over the course of your life, how many people have shown great interest in your hidden thoughts and ideas and experiences and memories?
Yeah, I can't really think of. I can't really think of too many. I can't really think of too many times that happen, because I just got into the habit of deferring.
You're setting
Asking
other
questions.
people up to talk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I understand that. So, how many people? So I asked you how many people. You said I can't really think of it happening too many times, which is a bit. It's funny because I have, after doing this for decades, a very finely tuned sense of evasion. Like, I know when people are kind of, I don't know if you've seen that meme where Homer Simpson just sort of backs away into the hedge, right?
No,
And so I know very clearly when people are dissembling or being evasive. And I'm not saying it's a conscious process or anything like that, but when people have a question they don't want to answer, they don't say to me, almost never, almost never say to me, Steph, I don't want to answer this question. It makes me uncomfortable. What do they usually do?
Yeah, they'll make stuff up, right?
Well, they'll just give me a bunch of loosey-goosey fog. It's kind of like if you reach for an octopus underwater, what do? They jet out all this ink and then they just slither away, right? And so a lot of times with people when they're talking, you ask them a question, they're not comfortable answering it, and rather than say directly, which is not easy to do, right? But rather than say directly, ooh, that kind of hits a nerve, or I don't really want to answer that question, or I have an urge to not answer that question, they do what psychologists call acting out. And what they do is instead of saying, I don't want to answer this question, they pretend to answer the question. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I honestly though, I wasn't actually trying to evade your question. Honestly, I was trying to, I don't have a perfect recall.
No. Now, okay. See, now hang on. I'm sorry to be annoying. So then what they do is they pivot to intentions. So I'm going to question your level of self-knowledge. And look, we all have areas of self-knowledge we need to work on. So again, I say this with all humility. I question your area of self-knowledge. Because what people do is when people don't want to answer a question, they will not answer the question indirectly, right? They'll just give me a bunch of syllables that don't add up to much. And then what they do is they claim intention and they say, well, I didn't mean to not answer your question, which is unverifiable. And of course, if you know everything about your motives, then you would have said to me, I don't really want to answer your question, rather than just not answer the question with a bunch of syllables. And then what they do, and I'm sorry to say, this is NPC predictability. Of course, I'm not saying you're an NPC. I'm just saying in this particular sequence, the pattern is very clear. So I ask a question, somebody's uncomfortable. They'll then give me a non-answer disguised as a question. I'll point that out. They'll say, I didn't mean to not answer. And then if I push further, or if they're on a roll, they do what you did at the end there, where you say, I don't have perfect recall, which is a non sequitur. I mean, so you're saying that I am demanding that you have perfect recall for the entirety of your 67 years. Of course, I'm not asking that, right? So that's an oddity to me, because nobody's ever asked you to have perfect recall. I'm not even sure if you remember what the question was. And if you do, if you could repeat it back, that would be helpful. I'm not trying to give you orders. It's just if you could.
Yeah, you asked me, you asked me for an example of somebody who had listened to me or asked questions.
No, I did not. No? I did not ask you for an example. I said, how many people over the course of your life have shown deep interest in your thoughts and feelings?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and that's, I'm at a loss to actually answer that question.
One right now. Right now, there's one, right?
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay, and I think this is why you're calling back, right? So you can't think of people, and I'm sad for this, I really am, and you can't think of people who, and this is true for listeners, everyone asks this for yourself, it's important, right? You can't think of people over the course of your life who've shown deep interest in what you think and feel, is that right?
Yes.
Right. So what impression does that give you about how interesting you are?
Boy. Maybe I'm not interesting at all. Yeah. Good point.
I mean, do you have that experience? Do you feel like if you try to get people to talk, either you have to cue them up to speak because people love to talk, or you're not able to provide much value because people haven't shown much interest in you.
Oh boy. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like I don't know. I think I'm a pretty interesting person, but maybe I'm just, delusional.
Well, no, listen, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I don't know what the answer is. So that's a very interesting challenge, right? And I don't know the answer to this. If you are an interesting person, and honestly, I think the more honest we are, the more interesting we are, and the more direct we are, the more interesting we are. So if you are an interesting person, then why are people not interested? That's a big question. And I've asked myself this. So again, I'm right down here with in the trenches with you. But that's a big question, right?
Yeah.
If you are an interesting person and over your 67 years, almost no one has shown interest in your thoughts and feelings, what does that mean? I don't know the answer to that, but there's something in your head that is putting things together to explain this. How could this be possible?
Well, I think I guess I've just sort of accepted it at this point.
Mm-hmm. Accepted what? You're interesting, but people aren't interested.
Well, I mean, we're all interesting to ourselves, right? So, it's kind of hard for me to sort of say, yes, I am interesting, or I'm not interesting, because...
Well, you're interesting to yourself, but other people aren't interested. How do we explain that?
I don't know. That's a very deep question, I think. Or maybe it's not a deep question.
You're talking about Robert Pirsig. This is a pretty deep book, right? So, and I'm happy to other people to chime in with comments about this as well. So in general, and maybe there's other options, but I think there's a fork in the road when we come across this kind of contradiction. I'm interesting, but people aren't interested in me. Either there's one of two possibilities. Well, three, I guess. Either A, I'm not interesting, but everyone's interesting because we all think and feel and have dreams and aspirations and ideas. So it's not true that you're not interesting. If people aren't interested in you, it's one of two things. Either you're bad at communicating and there's too much work for people to get to what's interesting about you, or what's the other option that could happen or could be?
Yeah, maybe I put people off somehow.
No, but that's the first one. So the first thing is that you're somehow not good at communicating, and therefore people can't burrow through to get through to what's interesting about you. It'd be like, I have a really great art gallery, but it's surrounded by landmines, barbed wire, and pit bulls. People are like, I don't know. I mean, maybe the paintings are good, but I'm not braving all of that, right? So it's too difficult for people to get to the art gallery. So one option is that you make it very difficult for people to find out what's interesting about you. But what's the other option? Nothing to do with insulting you, but what's the other option?
Maybe I'm just not. Maybe I'm just not interesting.
No, that's everyone's interesting. What's the other option? And the fact that this is hard to see is fascinating.
I don't know. What's your opinion? What's your idea on that?
Oh, it's not even an idea. It's a fact. So we eliminate that you're not interesting. The only other option, if you're good at communicating what you think and feel, the only other option as to why other people don't find you interesting is they're narcissistic, solipsistic, self-regarding assholes who wouldn't be interested in another person if they were on fire and holding a hamburger.
Okay.
That you are surrounded by people who are so self-absorbed they couldn't be interested in anyone other than themselves, i.e. your parents.
Right. Okay.
Everyone's your parents. And we do that. Like when we have bad parents, and I'm not saying they were terrible, right? But when there's this selfishness of not being interested, you owe your children attention. As much as you owe them food and shelter, you owe You must give your children attention. Like if I get some whippet or greyhound that desperately needs to be walked as my pet, I owe that dog to be walked. I owe it. And if I don't want to walk my dog, I have to give it to someone who will. So when you have children and you keep them at home, you owe them attention and you owe them interest. That is a foundational deal with the universe that you make when you have children, because children can't get people to be interested in them who aren't their parents in general, unless they're creepy pedos or something like that, right? So if your parents are so self-absorbed that they can't show any interest in you, your tendency will be to hang around lots of people in your life who are also self-absorbed and cue them up to talk about themselves and not impose your thoughts or ideas on other people. And so my guess is, because your parents didn't show interest in you, for your life, you tried unconsciously to normalize that behavior by surrounding yourself with other people who were self-absorbed and wouldn't show interest in you. And therefore, you ended up in the service of self-absorbed people, as most of us do, at least for some portion of our lives. You ended up in the service of other self-involved people by queuing them up the ability to talk about themselves, which is what narcissistic people love to do.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I mean that kind of explains. Do you remember that I called in on a call-in show? It was I had just finished listening to your episode where you were getting makeup put on your face by your daughter. I don't know if you remember that. And I called in and I said, I am very envious of your daughter. I wasn't envious. I was very envious of the interaction that she was having with her parent, with you. And now I think back on that and I think, yeah, okay, to me now, that with this conversation we're having now, that kind of makes perfect sense for me now. Yeah.
So what your father should have done, in my humble opinion, all those years ago, is he should have got 2 presents for you, a small one and a big one. And you know what was in those 2 presents?
Well, there's probably one of those presents would have been what I wanted, what I asked him for, perhaps.
The cowboy outfit, right?
Yeah, and then the other one would have been a cricket bat or a soccer ball. Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to be annoying. I am. I'm going back in time. Okay. I'm going back in time 60 years to fix your dad.
Okay.
What your dad, if you're really into cowboys, your father should have got you 2 presents. Number 1, you ready for some emotion?
Yeah. Okay.
Number 1, he should have got you a little cowboy outfit. Number 2, he should have got himself a big cowboy outfit so that you and your dad could play cowboys together.
Oh boy, this is really getting to me now.
I'm telling you, I knew the floodgates would come, because that's what your father should have. He shouldn't have met you halfway. Oh, well, fine. I'll give you that's fine. So for you, it was like my father should have got me a cricket bat or a soccer ball, but at least no. If your kid's into cowboys, what do you do as a parent? You get into cowboys. Right?
Yeah.
You go and you say, hey, tell me the cowboy stuff. What are we going to do? Let's go catch some Injuns. Let's go rescue the maiden from the train robbers. Let's go take down the sheriff who are the bad guys, right? Let's go rope some cattle. You go and make up the games for what your children love, because you enter into their world and you get to learn what they like and why. And you validate that cowboys are interesting and they're a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'm shaking a little bit here right now.
But wouldn't that be what a father would do?
Yes. Yeah.
We don't know what our kids are going to be interested in. My daughter has had interests that are incomprehensible to me, which is fine because I have interests that are incomprehensible to her. But I try to learn as much about what is interesting to her and try to enter into the world that she finds interesting so that I can both understand and validate that these things are interesting.
Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking right now.
Well, tell me what you're feeling. What are you thinking?
Oh, it's really hard for me to.
And I'm sorry he didn't do that. And I'm sorry that your mother didn't say, he's into cowboys. Go play cowboys together. Right? Isn't that what you should do? You know, my daughter's into makeup. And this is why it was emotional for you when I did the show with my daughter. My daughter's into makeup. So what do? I let her put makeup on me on a live stream. I don't even use makeup for my regular show. I know a lot of people in, quote, media do, right? So my daughter wants to do makeup. Fine. Let's do makeup. Right? I'll find a way to enjoy it. And it was fun, I think. And so when your kids are into stuff, you go into their world.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. Oh boy. Oh.
And it's always amazing. And I compliment your very big heart and sensitivity for this. It's a lovely thing to be a part of. And I really do appreciate your trust in this conversation. But isn't it amazing how fresh these wounds are 60 or more years later? Isn't that wild?
Yeah, it is.
You know, there's a guy in Japan who kept an apartment rented for 27 years. His wife was killed in the apartment. They couldn't find the killer. This was decades ago, of course. And he paid rent for 27 years. Do you know why?
To preserve his memory of his wife?
No.
Okay.
To preserve the evidence of the crime.
Oh boy.
And then eventually what happened was the DNA advanced to the point where they caught the killer. And he put hundreds of thousands of dollars of his money into keeping that apartment in a perfectly pristine state so that nobody went in or out. It was never rented out again. Nothing was ever cleaned. And then eventually, when the DNA had advanced enough, they were able to go in and catch the killer. And what I mean by that is the scene of the crime, the scene of the sadness, the scene of the tragedy was sealed off as if time passed outside of it, but never within. It was a little set of cubicles of frozen time. And that's kind of like our hearts with our childhoods. That when the disappointment and the sadness comes in, we seal it up, we wall it off, and we pay rent for the rest of our lives. And then somebody says, bro, let's go back in this room. Let's open the door. Let's go back in this room. Let's go back in this room. And you go into the room and you see your 6-year-old frame and the soccer ball being handed and your father getting angry, and you see it, and it's as fresh now as it was when it happened. And it's the same for you, and it's the same for me. And you deserved a father who would get you and him both cowboy outfits. And you deserved a father who would roll around with you as a cowboy, shouting yeehaw, shooting into the air, and rootin' tootin' everything that you could get your hands on. If you've ever seen the movie Parenthood, it's a very good movie, I think. With Steve Martin, he orders a clown to come, but the clown doesn't come. They send a stripper instead for his kid's party, and so he ends up being a cowboy. And of course, it's a completely impossible standard for parents because he's Steve Martin, who is one of the most brilliant comics of the past half century.
Yep.
And he just rolls into it and does it. And of course, when your kids say, you know, my daughter went through playing kitty cat games. She did baby dragon games. We did a game called Smorg because I'd read her The Hobbit when she was very little. And so I was Smorg the dragon, and we piled a bunch of plastic jewelry up around my belly, and I curled up, and she had to come in and retrieve the jewelry without waking me up. You know, this kind of thing, right? And so she'd come, and I remember she kept running. I would wake up and I would chase her, and she would go to a little corner of another room by the dresser where she would hide, and I'd pretend I couldn't find her, and I'd sniff, and then I'd go back to the bed, and then she'd come back and get more jewelry. And it was a great deal of fun. We actually played it with some friends of hers a couple of times. Anyway, I just remember one time I was chasing her. She must have been, I don't know, maybe 2.5, maybe 3. I was chasing her, and she'd had enough of running away from the dragon, and she turned around and she just clocked me in the thigh. It was like, dragon down, dragon Charlie horse, smoke down. And, it was like Bard with the bow at the end of The Hobbit. Boing! And, I mean, look, it's not like I'll do that on a regular basis, but that's what my daughter was into, and it was a great deal of fun. You just throw yourself in. You meet your children where they are, and I'm going to say validate. It sounds very artificial or whatever. It's like, you want to play this? Yeah, we just made up this game. We used to play this game whenever we were at swimming pools, which was a Smorg Says. And Smorg Says, so it would be like, and we do it with a bunch of kids, right? Because I worked in a daycare. I'm pretty good at whipping kids up to play a game together. So I'd be in, and I'd say, Smorg says that no child is allowed to be a drunken frog jumping into a pond. And of course, immediately they would be drunken frogs. And you just come up with whatever, right? Like Smorg says that you are not allowed to be a butterfly that falls asleep in the middle of a flight and falls into the water, or something like that. So they do all of the flapping and stuff like that. Smorg says no one is allowed to be a snake that gives birth and then falls into the water. Like whatever, you kind of come up with nonsense stuff. And then the kids would come up with their own, and sometimes I'd do it too, and all of that. And, it was just wonderful, for me at least, great memories. I know she still looks back upon that kind of stuff fondly. But I'm sorry, like, you deserved a father who didn't try to impose his stuff on you. I mean, I tried to show my daughter computer programming at one point. Zero interest. Like, zero interest. And that's fine. But she's also showed me games like the Among Us game, which we played a lot during COVID. And I'm not particularly great at that game. She's like a weird genius at this game. She's like Sherlock Holmes of the digital set. She knows where everyone is and who did what. And like, it's all kind of like an abacus going on in her brain. Whereas I'm just like, I think there was someone in electrical, but I can't remember. Right.
Right.
So, yes, not my particular type of game, but man, did we have a lot of fun playing it with friends, especially when we were kind of locked up at home. So I'm really sorry, of course, that your father gave you the impression that you're not interesting, or that you need to serve what other people are interested in. Because what that does, of course, is it generally brings you into the circle of people who are kind of self-obsessed, right? So earlier in the conversation, and I say this again without a single shred of negativity or criticism or anything like that. We're all struggling how to communicate better, right? But at the conversation, when things were floundering and I was having trouble finding value in what you were saying, after we talked about Robert Heinlein, but before we talked about Pirsig, I think it was, or maybe after Pirsig, but before the tiger, you asked me, you said, well, Steph, what are books that you like? Or what are books that you would recommend? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was, I'm not providing value. Okay. How will I provide value? I will queue up Steph for a speech.
Right.
I will serve Steph. I will serve his wanting to talk about. And I found it odd because it seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. I just sort of make a bookmark of it and I'm like wanted to return to it. And again, this is nothing critical about this. I say this, with great compassion and hopefully a reasonable amount of empathy. But when you were trying to provide value, you were having trouble providing value, not because you're not interesting, but because you just have been around a lot of selfish people. So then there was kind of like a little bit of a panic and I'm like, well, Steph, you talk about books you like. And then that was supposed to cue up me to then, books that I like. Let me go through the list. And then you would be providing value by queuing me up a topic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
But it didn't feel particularly organic, which I know sounds kind of ridiculous. It just doesn't feel quite organic, like I can tell a strawberry that's grown in a lab. But I didn't want to do that because I felt that there was something quite important to talk about, which we all struggle with. Yep. Conversation is a balance and it's tricky and it's a complicated, I don't want to talk too much. I don't want other people to talk too much. We want to connect and try and enhance each other's visibility to each other in the world, especially a public conversation like this. And so I don't want to impose the British thing. At the same time, I don't want to just stare there glassy-eyed while someone talks about their own nonsense forever and ever. Amen. And that's a challenge. And it is a big challenge for sure. And I'm sorry that you didn't have a father who, if he could go all out and get a female Western outfit for your mom, and then she could be the bartender, slinging beers down when you guys come back from in the back 40 or wrestling the rodeo or whatever cowboys do. I'm not a big knowledgeable guy about cowboys, but I did the truth about the Wild West. It's a pretty good presentation I did, but yeah. So, you should have had that, and your parents should have met you where you were interested and engaged in the worlds that you had in your mind, so that you feel like you go out into the world and the contents of your mind have value to others and you're confident in putting those forward. And if you can do that, and I know you can, then people will be interested, but it's kind of a circular thing. If you think you're not of value, then you're very abstract and you don't think about the other person too much. And then it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right. After saying conversation is a balance, I'll shut up and ask you how you're doing.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you so much. Honestly, allowing me, I don't know how you did that, guiding me through that, into that memory. And I'm still shaking, actually. I'm still feel like I'm going to start sobbing at any second.
And what's wrong with that? That's interesting.
Yeah,
I hate to say that's interesting, but that's your genuine experience, right? And it's a beautiful thing.
No, my dad criticized me. I remember this as well. One time he got really angry and he criticized me. He said, "Stop being so sensitive." And it just fucking devastated me, right? And
do you remember the circumstance?
Oh, we were all I remember is that we were outside. He was taking me somewhere or something, and I don't have other than that, I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were. I was quite young, but I do remember the words, and that memory is etched into my mind, and it really kind of was like I don't know, it just sort of set me off on this path of isolation, I guess.
Do you know the most likely reason why he said, "Don't be so sensitive"?
Well, I've mentioned this before to you that I discovered that he was very vain. He was sort of, a very vain person, and I became very embarrassed. He took me to some. He was into acting and stuff, like plays and all this kind of stuff. And he took me one time to watch him do this single solo thing. He's sitting on a chair on a stage, and it's a soldier's story or something about a deck of cards. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it included like a deck of cards and then some story he was saying. And I was so embarrassed by it because I thought, here you are playing this part of this sort of very deep and sensitive sort of story. And then I knew that this was just this didn't square with my own experience of him, right? And I don't know, that doesn't really answer the question you asked.
Sorry, and was he doing it like in an actual theater, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was an actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Henry Fonda. Was a very famous actor, of course, on Golden Pond and The Grapes of Wrath, and just in a whole bunch of movies. And he was very emotionally accessible on screen and almost completely emotionally inaccessible at home. I think it was Peter Fonda or Jane Fonda or someone was just talking about how cold and inaccessible and unemotional their father was. So, right. So, sorry, is there something else you wanted to mention?
No, I just that other memory popped into my head as you were as we were going through this, that memory of him criticizing me for my sensitivity, right? And that's a memory that kind of really deeply hurt me. And then sort of, I think that's why I started kind of falling in love in some sense with sort of these fictional characters like Clint Eastwood, these loner types. I became like really obsessed with loner types. And I remember even as a child, I started fantasizing about, I used to watch Doctor Who as a child, and I know, but I started fantasizing about having a TARDIS of my own where I could just take off in this thing to a different place because I didn't feel like it belonged.
Yeah, I remember growing up in London, they had the double-decker buses, and I'm sure maybe it's different now, but when I was a kid, they would have a little sealed-off area for the bus driver, and they would have a curtain.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking, what a great job. I'd just be sealed off from everyone, still to be something useful and productive. I'd get to see the world, but I wouldn't have to interact with anyone. Right. Now, maybe it's changed now. I'm sure that the bus drivers now take the coins or the tokens or whatever it is. Yeah. But back then, you had a bus. There was a conductor, right? The conductor would go and check the tickets. And this guy just sealed off, walled off, like in an isolation tank of guidance or driving or, I could take people the right route. Nobody would ever talk to me. I'm completely sealed off. Ah, lovely. Now here it is. I work alone guiding the world, right? I should build a little bus alcove around me or something like that. But yeah, no, it was lovely. That's my Catcher in the Rye moment. And wouldn't that be? And then I went through this strange obsession. It was not that strange, I guess. I went through this obsession for years as a kid that I had to count the number of exhausts every car had that went by.
Seriously?
Some had one, some had two. I think Volkswagen Bugs had four. It was complete OCD for years to have to count the exhaust. Anyway, that's a topic for another time, because don't want to delve into that right now. But the most likely reason why your father would say, stop being so sensitive, is he'd been an asshole and hurt you.
Right.
And then rather than say, ooh, I'm so sorry, because he felt bad, but he wouldn't self-criticize. So the badness wasn't in what he did to hurt you, but in you being hurt.
Yeah.
If a man punches his son, he's desperately afraid the son's going to get a black eye. For obvious reasons, right? People are going to say, hey, where did the black eye come from? Or something like that. In other words, it's the evidence. It's not the hurt. It's the evidence of the hurt that matters.
Right.
And so if your father was thoughtless, cold, cruel, selfish, whatever it is, right? Then he's going to say stuff that is going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Of course. And then when you're crying, he has a choice. He can say, ooh, that's not good for me to make my child cry, right? Or he can say, the problem is not what I did to make my child cry. The problem is my child crying.
Right.
And you have to stop being hurt.
Right.
Which means I'm not going to stop hurting you. I'm just going to blame you.
Yeah.
Right? It's like if some asshole punches his wife and it breaks one of his knuckles, he's going to get angry at her. Look what you made me do. That kind of stuff, right? It's very primitive, very almost like ape-like in terms of its projection.
Yeah. Very much so.
So he felt bad. And people who are selfish, when they hurt others, they view other people as the aggressors, or people who don't have genuine emotions themselves. And one of the most important genuine emotions is empathy. So people who don't have genuine emotions themselves always think that other people are faking it.
Right.
Oh, you're not that hurt. Oh, come on. It wasn't that bad. Oh, don't play it up.
Right.
Because they don't have genuine emotions themselves. So they assume everybody else's emotion is manufactured, is manipulative, is faked, right?
Right. Yeah.